Hey guys! Today we'll be recapping the manhwa, Leave Me Alone, Duke. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, as it really helps our channel. Thanks. Our story starts late at night in a carriage bound for the royal castle. In the carriage is a mother and son who soon arrive at the estate. The butler immediately recognizes her as Lady Mabel and invites them in at once. Mabel asks after her mother, who is currently on her deathbed. Literally. She is surrounded by relatives who are shocked to see Mabel back in the castle grounds. Her mother is delighted to see her, even though she half believes that this is all a dream. She also openly admits that she is on death's door, so before she passes on, Mabel beckons her son forward to meet his grandmother for the first time. Little Patrick seems to have no idea what's going on. Clearly, he just thinks this is a touching family reunion. His relatives apparently had no idea he even existed, including the aged mother who is fading before their eyes. After pinching her grandson's cheek and telling her daughter she loves her, the old lady finally passes away, leaving her distraught children to mourn her. It's all very sad. But now that the immediate drama has passed, there are a lot of questions that need answering. Her siblings had no idea Mabel was even alive, let alone a mother. But she doesn't have time to clear up the confusion. They're not even planning to stay for the funeral. Her brother begs her to at least stay the night, and Mabel agrees. But it turns out that was the wrong move. She should have trusted her gut and got back on the road, because the man who has been hunting her down for all these years has finally found her. He's finally found his fiancée? Oh my gosh. So much has happened, and we're only on the first chapter. Duke Quintrell may be the father of Mabel's son, judging by those bright blue eyes. But he is not her fiancé, at least not according to the would-be bride. You see, Mabel is the second-born child and eldest daughter of the Marquise Lobby. 6 years ago, she landed an engagement with the heir to the oldest and most influential family in the land, Percy Quintrell. But 1 year later, she disappeared after a wagon accident. They never found her body, but when 3 years passed and nothing more was discovered, Mabel was declared legally deceased, and therefore the engagement was cut off. But now, the Duke is so relieved to find her alive and well that he doesn't care about all that. He doesn't even want to know the reason she ran away in the first place. He just wants her back. Aw, it would be kind of sweet, if it wasn't also a little creepy. She doesn't seem to want anything to do with him, but it's all over when he spots Patrick. His eyes are a dead giveaway. They're a trademark of the Quintrell family and only appear in heirs. Seeing his sister's distress, the lobby heir tries to send the Duke away, but he ends up staying the night under the guise of mourning for their mother. How sneaky is that? Before heading to his room, the Duke warns Mabel not to attempt another nighttime escape, or else he'll really lose it. After all, he's been searching for her for 5 years. That amount of time would drive anyone crazy. That night, Mabel can't sleep. After remembering the near-death experience that caused her to flee in the first place, she decides to leave. She grabs her son and jumps in the nearest carriage, hoping to cross the border before sunrise. But the Duke won't let her get away that easy. Little does she realize he's the one driving the carriage. And they're not headed for the border, they're headed for his mansion. This guy just cannot let her go. He stops the carriage to talk to her, asking why she doesn't love him anymore and why can't they just start over. Dude, she spent 5 years hiding from you. Maybe take the hint? To really drive her point home, Mabel tells him that she doesn't love him anymore. The Duke takes one look at her and says she's lying. Wow. The level of delusion here is just... He takes her shaking hand in his and says he loves her. Mabel thinks he's lying too, but right now she's more concerned about her own options. After a moment to think, she gives in and promises not to run away, only on the condition that he takes her back to the Lobby mansion to attend her mother's funeral. Her brother is surprised to see her return so quickly, but as usual, Miss Mysterious doesn't have time to explain. They head inside to find her some mourning clothes. But before she reaches the door, Mabel runs into the Duke, with her son in his arms. That can't be a welcome sight. Even though he was only helping Patrick out of the carriage, Mabel grabs her son back immediately. The Duke watches him walk away with a suspicious look in his eye, wondering when she'll make a break for it. Honestly, it's hard to believe these kids were ever in love. Neither of them seem to trust each other one bit. While the grown-up relatives attend the funeral out in the cemetery, Mabel and Patrick sit inside reading together. I wonder if that kid has any idea what's going on. To him, this is all just a big adventure. He even asks his mother if she wants to come and play outside with him. read the room, buddy. As well as being a bit inappropriate, the other reason they can't play outside is because Patrick can't be seen by the public. Word would get around real fast if Mabel was suddenly seen alive and with a son out of wedlock. A knock on the door announces Mabel's brother, who is accompanied by his wife, Christine. Running in behind them is the youngest sister, Marie. Now that the family are assembled, they can finally talk in peace and maybe shed some light on what the heck Mabel has been up to the last 5 years. As a noble, the only skill she really has is sewing, so she made a living from the pennies that she received as a seamstress. She also admits that yes, Patrick is Percy's child, although I'm pretty sure everyone had guessed that by now. Despite his noble heritage, Mabel wants to continue raising Patrick alone, which makes her siblings uncomfortable. They don't want to just let her wander back into the wilderness after missing her for so long. A sudden call for the Marquise interrupts their conversation. Duke Quintrell has arrived, and he wants to speak with the heir to the Lobby family. They sit down for a very tense cup of tea, where the Duke immediately announces his intention to marry Mabel. Slightly awkward for the Marquise, since he's literally just heard his sister swear to never marry him. The poor guy is literally sweating, trying to find a way to be honest while not offending the Duke at the same time. In the end, he settles with politely telling him that a marriage with his sister is impossible. Even though he himself really wanted them to be together, he can't refuse his sister's wishes, and she has expressed clearly that she doesn't want the Duke to be in Patrick's life. But frankly, even he isn't totally sure why that is. He even asks the Duke himself if he has any idea why she rejected him. Obviously, he's also stumped, or if not, he's a very good actor. Now that his ego is a little bruised, the Duke takes his leave and runs into Mabel in the hallway. Because, of course he does. She thought he'd already left, apparently, but Percy takes it as a sign that they're destined since they keep running into each other. She tells him outright that she wants nothing to do with him, and when he asks why, she seems surprised that he doesn't already know. As usual, she refuses to explain herself and just turns around to leave without another word. Anyone else kind of getting frustrated with this girl? She refuses to tell anyone what happened. She's being so dramatic, and for what? At the most convenient moment possible, Patrick wanders down the stairs in his pajamas and starts talking to the Duke, who he calls Uncle. Mabel freaks out, her hands shaking as she leads her son away from Percy, who tells her he really likes the Duke. Uh-oh, this is a nightmare situation for Mabel. I can see the Duke finding a way to use this to his advantage in the future. While her son sleeps soundly beside her, Mabel can't help but wonder if the reason he took a liking to the Duke is because they're blood-related. Then finally, in a flashback, we get to see some of the eventful carriage trip that started all this drama 5 years back. She had just found out that she was pregnant with the Duke's child and wasn't sure how he'd react. She was on her way to see him when the carriage stopped abruptly. She opened the door and an arrow suddenly flew inside, narrowly missing her face. Shaking, she assumed they'd been attacked by burglars or bandits and had to listen to the horrible sounds of her carriage driver being slaughtered outside. His last words were telling her to run, but before she could open the door, the attacker came in and grabbed her, throwing her onto the ground outside. There were bodies everywhere, all slaughtered by that one man. She asked him what she did to deserve this, and the assassin responded that he was only doing what he'd been told. He raised his sword to kill her, and she screamed out, offering him double, even triple whatever he'd been paid. At this point, she was only trying to stay alive for her unborn baby and would do whatever it took to escape. The assassin, seeing her clutch at her stomach, told her one thing, that she should stop thinking about her fiancé. He knew she'd gone to visit a friend's house and suddenly turned home, something she only told her family and her fiancé. So if those were the only people who knew, then the culprit was among them. Mabel trusted her family, so the only person who could have ordered her assassination was the Duke, at least in her mind. He also said that if he saved her, he would have to go right back to her fiancé and be killed for failing his task. I don't think he could have spelled it out any clearer. The only reason he felt any sympathy for her was because she was pregnant, so he gave her a choice. A painless death under his sword here and now, or go home and eventually die at the hands of her fiancé. Obviously, she didn't like either of those options, so instead, she ran. Does anyone else think it's kind of fishy, by the way? Like, why would an assassin leave his target alone and straight up tell her who hired him? I'm a little sus. Poor Mabel believed him completely, as you probably would if you'd just seen innocent people murdered and were all shaken up. She ran through the forest, wondering how things could have gone so wrong when they were so in love. She did have some doubts, but considering his position as heir to the most powerful family in the kingdom, maybe he really could just pick her up and throw her away like that. Mabel awakes from her nightmares of the past the next morning, relieved to find Patrick safe and sound beside her. She bumps into Christine in the hallway, who directs her to the library to see her brother. Just as she's turning to leave, Christine dares to suggest that she stay a little longer in the mansion. After all, she has a child. It must be difficult to raise him alone, especially without her family's power and wealth. Mabel appreciates her sister-in-law's concern, but doesn't make any promises. She finds her brother preparing for a political meeting. He still seems curious about her escape attempts and asks if Patrick is the problem. He kind of insinuates that she might have wanted to ditch the baby with her family and disappear, but Mabel sets him straight. Patrick is her one and only priority. She's not about to leave him alone. But she is thinking about staying in the lobby mansion, which her brother is delighted to hear. It seems she's decided that there's no point in running, at least not for the next few days. There's safety in numbers after all, and her family are respected enough that they can stand against the Duke's surprise visits. That doesn't mean they won't run into each other though. Even at the political meeting, her brother runs into Percy. They have yet another uncomfortable conversation about his son, but before it gets juicy, the Queen's arrival is announced. All the nobles stand to attention for Her Majesty, who is honestly giving a major slay. I mean, look at that fit! And the purple hair? Love it! The meeting commences, which gives the nobles an opportunity to talk about the Queen's upcoming birthday. It's the first one since her coronation, so it's kind of a big deal. And since she doesn't have a husband, she appoints Duke Quintrell to plan it for her. Ooh, does the Queen have her eye on Percy? As it turns out, yes, she does. Wilhelmine Freeman ascended the throne at only the age of 19. 4 years ago, she met the Duke at a party and fell in love instantly. She made her feelings known, and he ended up rejecting her. Yikes. But despite the humiliation and the news of Percy's engagement and the whole Mabel drama, her feelings have never wavered. From pretty much the moment Mabel's death was publicly announced, she has been openly flirting with Percy whenever possible. This girl really doesn't mess around. Good thing the Duke isn't afraid to shoot her down every time. Of course, on this occasion, there's not much he can do. Who could refuse a royal request? Although, he does try, and she kind of just shoves it down his throat until he accepts. It's extra uncomfortable because this is a task usually performed by the Queen's partner. I'm sure that's exactly why she chose him for it, and it doesn't help that the nobles are pressuring her to find a husband. As soon as the subject is brought up, she openly suggests Duke Quintrell, asking the others what they think of him, as if he's not literally sitting right there. Ugh, so awkward. He just about manages to sidestep the question, suggesting that the council put forward a selection of potential candidates from the best families in the kingdom. When they break for lunch, Percy gets summoned to the Queen's office for a private chat. This can't be a good sign. Once they're alone, she speaks more frankly. How many times will he continue to reject her? The Duke always says the same thing, that he loves his fiancée and can't forget her. This seems to drive Wilhelmine over the edge. She says she's waited long enough and asks him outright to marry her. Left with no other choice, Duke Quintrell admits the truth, the real reason he can't accept her proposal. Because Lady Mabel is still alive. Oh, you've done it now. That's supposed to be a secret. Seriously, this guy is either really thick or he really is out to get her. 2 years ago, when Mabel had been missing so long that she was registered deceased, Queen Wilhelmine was over the moon. Obviously, that's kind of suspicious, but she really just loves the Duke that much. She was hoping this would finally be a turning point and that her love would begin to forget his former fiancé. So 2 years later, when he hears that she's still alive, Her Majesty is shocked. She doesn't believe it at first, but when he explains the story of how he found her, it starts to sink in. After a moment to think, Wilhelmine says her feelings will remain the same. You gotta give the girl credit, she sure is determined. He tries to convince her that another man would be just as good, but the Queen will not be swayed. In fact, she kind of guilt trips him, saying that the only person she would ever marry is him. In that case, the royal line of succession is directly in his hands. If he doesn't agree, the kingdom might have a pretty big issue. It makes the Duke hella mad. He hides it well, and instead of getting angry, he admits there is another reason he can't marry her. He already has a kid. Boom! Surely that will do the trick. Marrying him would be a dishonor for a monarch. It's even against the royal laws, but Wilhelmine won't hear it. She doesn't care what she has to deal with so long as she gets him. Kinda sounds like a threat, and the Duke takes it as one. He warns her not to touch his family, or else his loyalty will truly be tested. The second she steps outside, the Queen demands that the Marquis lobby come to meet her at once. Back at the lobby mansion, the youngest daughter Marie is playing with Patrick, introducing him to all sorts of toys to play with. Mabel thanks her, but she doesn't seem to mind. She's still pretty young herself, and besides, Patrick is just too cute. She also makes a comment about how much he looks like his dad, but Mabel kind of just ignores that one. Their peaceful playtime is soon interrupted by the king of uninvited intrusions, the Duke Quintrell himself. Except this time, he doesn't say a word. He just hugs her. He's so relieved that she hasn't left, I guess he just couldn't contain himself. And maybe he's a total psychopath, but he does seem genuinely relieved. I don't know, guys. I'm finding it real hard to peg the villain in this series. Apart from very dramatic entrances, the Duke also came to see the Marquis. Christine announces that he was called back to the royal palace on Her Majesty's request. And speaking of Her Majesty, Percy comes clean about admitting the truth to Wilhelmine, and immediately Mabel is furious. Understandably. He explains the whole situation with the Queen and how she's been trying to propose to him for literally 4 years now. Mabel is pretty shocked that he refused her. I mean, their marriage would make him a king. And she still doesn't believe that the Duke is truly in love with her, so there would be no reason to refuse. Mabel accidentally admits that she was still planning to run away in future, and Percy asks if she really wants to spend her life like that, if she wants Patrick to grow up without a father. Once again, her walls come up, and she tells him not to worry about her son. Emphasis on her. Frustrated, she turns away from him. She's only halfway across the room before the drama king has grabbed her from behind, wrapping his arms around his fiancée. Just as extra as the Queen, he asks her again to marry him. God, what is with these people? So much drama. I'm not sure if it's fear or romance, but Mabel's heart is beating like crazy right now. He's holding her tight, like really tight, as if he thinks at any moment she might break free. It's really hard to even think when he's like this, but Mabel reminds herself that all of this is fake. She still believes the Duke is hiding his true intentions, waiting for the perfect time to strike. So she breaks free, telling him to take the opportunity that Queen Wilhelmine is offering him. The Duke is shocked to hear her speaking so comfortably about a woman that wants him. Before now, he really thought she was lying when she said she didn't love him, but this makes him second guess. When he asks her straight up, Mabel confirms his fears. She even goes so far as to say she never loved him. Ouch! That one's gotta hurt. But just like Her Majesty, Percy is persistent. Before he leaves, he tells her that he never will stop loving her, no matter how she feels. Kind of inconsiderate, don't you think? Once the Marquis has returned from his chat with the Queen, he sits down with the Duke. She told him to cut off the engagement between his sister and the Duke. She even offered him a royal reward for cooperating. And since there's a kid in the mix, she offered to adopt it herself. Damn, that's messed up! The Duke tells him not to worry. No matter what happens, he will protect Mabel. He also says that if she continues to refuse him, he'll just be single until he dies, which is emo as heck. But before he leaves, he asks the Marquis one favor, to help convince his sister. This puts Mabel in a tough spot. She won't change her mind about the Duke, but she also doesn't want to bring down the wrath of the Queen on both their families. That gives her brother a small spark of hope. If she's worried about the Quintrell family, maybe she does still care for him after all. For once, Mabel doesn't outright deny his claims. He is the father of her child. Of course, she doesn't want him hurt, but she can't tell if she hates him or loves him, especially when her brother tells her that the Duke swore to protect her against the Queen. As usual, the poor Marquis is unable to sway his sister, and to be honest, he doesn't want to. He just wants her to be happy for once. So they agree to let her live a quiet life in the lobby mansion for a little while, hoping that the Duke will eventually give up. Right. I think we all know that's not gonna happen. Before long, a month has passed and the Queen's birthday comes around. The capital city of Cablin overflows with cheerful people, singing and dancing for their Majesty. Despite his frustrations, the Duke does his duty and plans a wonderful party, sparing no expense. He's got plenty of admirers among the guests too, but no one will approach him for fear of upsetting the Queen. She arrives in full royal splendor and immediately demands that Percy stay beside her the whole night. Talk about clingy. She asks him for a dance, but the Duke says he's not feeling well, so then she just walks away? This girl couldn't be more sus if she tried. She walks up to the top of the staircase, grabbing everybody's attention. Her speech starts with the usual, thanking her guests, a toast to her birthday, but then she announces her one special wish for the day and calls Duke Quintrell to come up and join her. Uh-oh, I have a bad feeling about this. She gets him into position and declares that by royal order, Percy Quintrell become the prince consort of the Freeman Kingdom. Well, there it is, folks. She's officially done it. It's not so much a proposal as an order given on the Queen's birthday, no less. I'm not sure if he can wriggle his way out of this one. Despite the crowds watching their every move, despite how clearly she made this a command, the Duke somehow finds the nerve to refuse her yet again. In front of everyone, he declares that he already has a child and would therefore not be fit to be the prince consort. Oh, great! So to save his own hide, he's thrown his fiancée and son under the bus? Way to go, Duke! He formally apologizes for deceiving the royal family. He bows once and then walks away, leaving her standing there in front of all her guests. Anyone else feel like he's not going to get away with this? Humiliating the Queen in front of all her subjects? Someone's gonna pay for that. The Marquis' lobby catches the Duke outside, furious that he just exposed his sister like that. Patrick will now be the subject of all the noble gossip for weeks, if not months, and they won't rest until they find the mother too. As usual, the Duke assures him it will all be fine. He has some kind of plan, but just like his fiancée, he prefers to be mysterious and secretive until it's done. Irritating as ever, Percy. Thank you. He leaves for some kind of business trip, while the poor Marquis is left worrying about his sister and his nephew's safety. Meanwhile, the lady herself is sitting at home doing a bit of embroidery. She has no idea what's just happened at the party. Right now, she's focused on getting her son ready for bed. He asks about the party and how come they couldn't go. It's fun playing with his mother and aunt, but he wants friends his own age to hang out with. So Mabel promises to take him to a party someday, when he's a little older. That's obviously a lie, but it is true that she can't keep him cooped up in the mansion much longer. She's already planning their next escape, but in the meantime, she changes the subject to tell him how handsome he looks. Patrick sees an opportunity and takes it, asking if he's as handsome as his father. He's never asked about his dad before, so Mabel is shocked. It's just like the Duke said to her. He's been pretending not to know, but that doesn't mean he's not curious. Has he figured out the truth already? Before she can fumble her way through some excuse, a maid announces that the others are back from the party. It's still early, so immediately she knows something is up. Marie tells her everything, from the proposal to the public humiliation of the Queen. Mabel is instantly furious, but so is another character who we haven't had a chance to meet yet. This is Marguerite, or Meg, the Duke's younger sister, who is literally a copy and paste version of him. The rumors have already spiraled out of control. People are saying that he has 10 illegitimate children and a peasant wife. The Duke may not care what people are saying behind his back, but Meg certainly does. She tries to talk some sense into him, asking why he's still pursuing a woman who clearly doesn't want him. Finally, someone talking sense in this manhwa. The Duke doesn't take kindly to her advice and immediately turns around, headed for the lobby mansion. Off to cause another scene again. He arrives at the lobby estate and immediately sets himself up with some tea on the balcony. Because at this point, it's practically his home as well. Mabel reluctantly joins him, nervous, since this is the first time they've seen each other in a month. She asks why he refused the Queen, even though I'm pretty sure by now everyone and their mothers know why. She seems worried that he feels a responsibility to Patrick. But the Duke sets her straight, admitting that Mabel will always be more precious to him than their son. He also admits that if two parents aren't married, the laws of Freeman says that the custody of a child can be claimed by the parent of higher status. So technically, he could take Patrick from her anytime he wants. What the heck is this guy's tactic? I thought he wants her to fall in love with him, so why is he threatening her? When she asks if that's his plan, the Duke says he doesn't want to separate them. So she might as well make things easier and come along too. He accepts that he must have done something wrong to make her so upset with him, but he has no idea what it is. At least, that's what he says anyway. He gets down on one knee and asks for a chance to make up for his mistake. Just 1 year. If she is willing to give 1 year of her life to him and at the end of it she still hates him, then he will let them both go. But she has to do the whole 9 yards and become Duchess of Quintrell and everything. To earn her trust, he's even willing to change his will so that all the Quintrell estates will be inherited by Patrick when he dies. And he offers to transfer sole custody to Mabel. It's a tempting deal, but she still believes that he was the one who tried to kill her. What if this is all some dramatic ploy to finish her off and stage it as an accident? Mabel agrees to think about his offer and promises to give her answer by next week. She's still thinking about the offer by the time she arrives at the royal palace. It was bound to happen at some point, but finally, the Queen has summoned Mabel for a private audience. They've never actually met before, so she introduces herself and the two women take a seat. You could cut the tension with a knife. Poor Mabel is freaking out, while the queen is clearly just toying with her. She congratulates Lady Lobby on her safe return, and also on the health of her child. As if she doesn't know already, she asks Mabel who the father is, forcing her to confirm that it is indeed Duke Quintrell. She also asks if she intends to marry the Duke, which Mabel quickly denies. But she admits that it's not quite that simple. If she refuses the Duke completely, she risks losing custody of her child, which the Queen is shocked to hear. Obviously, the Queen's #1 motive is still marrying Percy, which means getting Mabel out of the picture. So she offers to make an exception to the laws, asking if she would still want nothing to do with the Duke if she had 100% of custody. Mabel says yes, so the Queen immediately declares to protect her right over Patrick, even if the nobles oppose it. In return, she wants Mabel to promise that she will never marry the Duke. It feels dangerous to make a deal with Wilhelmina of all people, but what choice does she have? She just offered her everything she's ever wanted on a silver platter. So of course, Mabel accepts, promising to keep their conversation a secret from the Duke. Just as she's leaving, Her Majesty asks one last question. She's curious after all this time why Mabel still refuses Percy, even after she originally loved him and they shared a child together. As always, Miss Mysterious refuses to answer, so the Queen drops it. Everything seems to be finally going Mabel's way for once. That is, until she runs into the Duke outside the palace. Oops, so much for keeping their meeting a secret. So she tries to make the excuse that she came to see her brother, but the Duke points out that there is no council meeting today. He asks if she came to meet the Queen, which, like, they're both in the royal palace, what else could she possibly be doing? As usual, Mabel is a terrible liar. Her trembling hands always give her away and give the Duke another opportunity to act dashing and chivalrous. Mabel snatches back her hand and says it's a secret. But that just makes the Duke more curious, and he knows Wilhelmina well enough to know that she probably threatened to keep her silent. Mabel just brushes him off, saying he's worrying over nothing. So then he suddenly turns around and says he'll just ask the Queen himself. She grabs him and asks him not to, still trying desperately to convince him that it's not a big deal. Someone get this girl some acting classes, stat! He can tell she's uncomfortable, so in the end, Percy drops it and lets her walk away. When Mabel arrives home, Christine is there at once to check that she's okay. She confides in her stepsister about all the offers being floated her way. It's a difficult position to choose between the Duke and the Queen, but either way, she gets to raise Patrick herself, so I guess both are kind of a win. Speaking of the kid, Patrick comes running up to his mother as soon as he spots her, asking where she's been and who she was meeting up with. As usual, his first guess is the Duke. Apparently, he's just obsessed with that guy. Mabel quickly changes the subject and suggests they have dinner together instead. At the next council meeting, the Queen is told that the king of a neighboring nation known as Tesla is interested in negotiating a marriage with Wilhelmina. He has a good reputation. He's ambitious and generous, and he's supposedly quite handsome. Plus, his country is very promising and would make a great alliance if she agreed to the match. But shockingly, she doesn't. She thinks it would be difficult to keep the peace between two ruling families, especially once kids and succession got involved. I'm sure that's true, but let's be honest. We all know the real reason is still the Duke. They settle the matter by agreeing that she will end up marrying a freeman noble. Then, without warning, the Queen suddenly brings up the custody of Percy's child and says she strongly believes it should be handed to the mother. Well, that was subtle. The Duke opposes it immediately, declaring that a law written by their ancestors shouldn't be messed with. The Queen says she doesn't intend to break the law, but she's the monarch after all. Who else could have the power to bend the rules? Luckily, the Duke is also backed up by other council members who think his illegitimate child makes him an inappropriate match for the prince consort, regardless of who the child belongs to. They suddenly start suggesting their sons or other good freeman nobles. But the Queen really won't let it go. She still wants to give total custody of Patrick to Mabel, claiming that it would solve any issues in his reputation and allow them to get married. But if there's one person more stubborn than the Queen, it's Percy. He outright declares his intention to marry the mother of his child and basically tells her to stop interfering. The nobles do their best to change the subject, but by then, Wilhelmina is having something of a psychotic break. She starts laughing like a maniac and orders the Duke to bring the child to the palace so that she can see him in person. She wants to know for certain if he's the Duke's son and says that if he refuses, she will punish him for lying. When Mabel hears the news, she's mad. Not just because now her son is being thrown into the middle of the mess, but because the Queen basically backstabbed her. She promised to protect her son, and now she's demanding he make an appearance? This is not gonna fly well with Mama Mabel. When the Duke gets home from the council meeting, there's a letter waiting for him. He barely reads it and immediately tells his sister to prepare for guests and bring out the best tea. Lady Mabel has finally made a visit to the Quintrell mansion. It's been a long time since she last stepped foot in this home. You'd think she might be triggered, but Mabel has fond memories of this place. The house looks exactly the same as she left it. The only things that have changed are her and the Duke. He, of course, is delighted to see her. Maybe he thinks she's come to accept his proposal, but if he had any hopes for this meeting, Mabel shuts them down immediately. She tells him straight away that she heard about what happened at the council, and the Duke starts to sweat. He tries to make excuses, but she's not interested. She comes clean about the deal between her and the Queen, but admits that after today, she can't keep her promise. So instead, she agrees to his offer to live as his wife for 1 year. Whoa! I was not expecting that! I thought she came to tell him off, not to marry him. The Duke should be jumping for joy, but actually, he's upset. He knows she's doing this because she thinks Patrick is causing trouble for Percy in front of the nobility. He tells her not to care about rumors and what other people think of him, but Mabel says that's ridiculous. How could she not care? That makes him feel a little better, seeing that she cares about his reputation. So he draws up their contract with a smile, even recognizing Patrick as his legal heir. They both sign, and then the deed is done. He sends it to the family attorney so that it will be all formally legalized. Mabel returns home to break the news to her family, but it seems like they're kind of relieved. The only thing now is to tell Patrick. It's hard enough that he's so fond of the Duke, and she still doesn't want to tell him that he's his father. But even a 4-year-old is going to have some suspicions if they suddenly move in and get married. Her family encourage her to tell Patrick the truth as soon as possible to avoid any damage. That night, while they're lying in bed, she suddenly brings up the Duke. Straight away, Patrick asks when he can next see him, since the Duke hasn't come to visit in a while. She mentions the idea of them living together, and he immediately gets excited. It's quite a surprise to his mother, since he's only met the Duke a handful of times and has never been to his house. But Patrick doesn't mind. He's also a lot sharper than his mother realizes. As soon as she mentions moving in, he asks if they're getting married. You can't get anything past this kid. He even asks if she loves him. Mabel sidesteps the question and says she loves Patrick the most. She tries to tell him the truth about his father, but the words just won't come out. Luckily, Patrick does the work for her, asking if the Duke is his real father. He's such a sweet kid. Mabel is expecting all kinds of questions about why they didn't live together from the start or why she kept the secret from him. But Patrick doesn't care about any of that. He's just happy they're all going to be together, and whatever is in the past can stay there. Seriously, what a mature 4-year-old! Mabel is so delighted that she tucks him back into bed, singing him lullabies until he falls asleep. Aww. Soon, the Duke's birthday rolls around, which makes for a busy day at the Quintrell household. And there will be guests galore. The preparations have all been made. The only thing missing is the Duke himself. Lawrence the butler reassures her that he will be on time. He's probably busy being excited that his fiancée has finally decided to move in. One person who won't be very happy to hear the news, of course, is the Queen. She's gone to extra effort to make herself look as radiant as possible. She even brought a gift. The other guests immediately start kissing the Queen's butt as soon as she enters, telling her how beautiful she looks. The Duke is the only one not paying attention to her, as he's already surrounded by a crowd of his own admirers. And damn does he look fine! Seriously, Mabel could do a lot worse. The Queen makes her way over to Percy, who is just as cold as usual despite her many attempts to flirt with him. She encourages him to take a few days off after all his hard work, which he does actually consider. She mentions her special gift, which she wants the two of them to open in private. Sensing a trick, the Duke loudly claims that he wants everyone here to see it, so that everyone knows how kind the Queen is. She brings the gift out, and Percy starts to unwrap it. He pauses halfway, shocked when he realizes what it is. Wilhelmine has gifted him the clothes worn by her great-grandfather, the first king of Freeman. She's basically saying she wants him to be head of state beside her. The Duke begrudgingly accepts, and then Wilhelmine asks him for a dance. He perks up a bit after that, because it gives him an excuse to introduce his only dance partner for the evening, his fiancée, Mabel. She's even dressed in matching clothing too, which is really cute. Patrick looks like a mini Percy in his outfit. The Duke introduces him to the rest of the guests as his fiancé and son. The Queen storms out at once, making Mabel worried. But she really wasn't getting the hint. I guess this was bound to happen at some point. All eyes are on them now, and although Patrick desperately wants to join the party, his parents decide it's best for him to be tucked up in bed. I keep forgetting that he's literally 4. It's already way past his bedtime. Literally, the second Patrick has left, the Duke starts getting real touchy-feely with his fiancée. He's so excited to finally show her off in public. And now that the queen is gone, everyone is allowed to be excited about Lady Mabel's return. But after thousands of questions about her disappearance and her mystery child, Mabel is exhausted by the end of the evening. While taking a quiet break on the balcony, she is approached by Meg, who welcomes her back with a warm smile. She can tell that Mabel is a bit uneasy about how everything went down today. But since she went ahead with it anyway, even though it was the Duke's plan, Meg thinks she must really be in love. Oh my god, give this poor woman a break already! Why is everyone so interested in whether she's in love or not? Mabel assures her future sister-in-law that this is all to secure Patrick's custody. But even if that is the case, Meg is just happy that they'll be living together soon. As always, Mr. Interruption arrives, so Meg wanders off to give the couple some alone time. He seems worried about how Mabel handled all the social interaction, but she assures him that she had a good time despite all the rumors and questions. Then everything gets a little quiet. The Duke seems to think that's the perfect time to reach over and pull some grass from her hair. But it only makes things more awkward. Uncomfortable, Mabel wishes him a happy birthday and then heads indoors. Jeez, I wonder what their chemistry was like before if this is how they ended up. 3 days later, Mabel and Patrick are due to officially move into the Quintrell estate. The Duke is so excited that he keeps mumbling out loud to himself, irritating his poor sister who's trying to read. Like the rest of us, Meg is surprised that the Duke has clung onto her for so many years, despite constant rejections and disappearances. But the Duke doesn't seem to mind. It's all coming together at last, and he truly believes that he may make Mabel fall in love with him. Cocky much? Percy turns the conversation on his sister, asking if there's anyone who's caught her eye. Although she's of an age to be married, Meg has plenty of time and doesn't fancy anyone at the moment. Just as her brother is starting to get pushy, a steward announces that a carriage full of luggage has arrived at the front door. He practically leaps out of his seat and runs straight outside to greet his fiancée. She's still formal with him, despite the fact that they're contractually married as of today. Little Patrick isn't quite as excited to see the Duke for once. Maybe since he knows that he's his father, it's a bit awkward? He even calls him uncle rather than dad. Percy can tell that the kid is scared, so he gets down and tells him to call him whatever he likes, so long as he's comfortable. That's all that matters. He invites them both inside for some food and leads Patrick hand in hand to the door like a real father. This must be so weird for Mabel. Meg takes her to her new room, which has been decorated with every imaginable luxury. Mabel is very grateful, but she's already a bit overwhelmed by the glitz and glamour. Their lunch was extravagant, and the place is like a maze. She sent Patrick and Percy off on a tour of the house to give them some time to get to know each other. Patrick's eyes are even wider than usual, if that's possible. They visit the reading room, where he asks if the Duke has any comics. Look around, buddy. I don't think this is that kind of place. But the Duke will do just about anything for his son, so he offers to buy some. The reading room also doubles as an office, so if Patrick ever needs his father, he tells him to come here. Then, without any warning, the Duke suddenly asks him if he hates him. Oh my god, this guy is such a drama queen! But he knows that Patrick will tell the truth, so I guess it's only natural for him to be curious. Like all kids, Patrick is brutally honest and admits that he's not so happy with the new arrangement. But not because he hates the Duke. It seems more like he's scared that he'll suddenly disappear. He sticks out his pinky and asks him to promise. If the Duke will stay by his side, then he will call him Dad. If not, he doesn't want him. But the Duke takes him very seriously and makes the pinky promise. From then on, Patrick is all smiley and calls him Dad straight away. Aw, this kid is so innocent. Meanwhile, Mabel is summoned to greet the Quintrell staff. She seems to be looking for someone in particular. Some maid she remembers from before her accident who is no longer here. The butler tells her that the maids come and go pretty regularly, so the person she's after probably doesn't work here anymore. She formally introduces herself, so the head staff members do the same. The butler's name is Lawrence, and the head maid is Michelle. They're already treating her like the mistress of the house, which makes the Duke very happy when he turns up. He calls over a maid named Janet, who was Meg's nursemaid a long time ago. The Duke wants Janet to help look after Patrick too. But up until now, Mabel has been totally responsible for her son, so she isn't totally comfortable with the idea. She's also worried about Patrick sleeping alone for the first time. But between the Duke's encouragement and Mabel's assurance, the kid agrees to start doing things for himself and with a nursemaid. After that's sorted, they gather in the dining room for another insanely extra dinner. Although I don't know why Mabel is complaining. I would want to eat like this every day. Patrick struggles a bit with his steak, so the Duke cuts it up for him. Mabel is surprised but relieved to see the two of them getting along more comfortably after their tour around the mansion. It looks like they're starting to become a real family. That evening, Mabel has the luxury of a whole team of maids to bathe and dress her, which is probably the first time in years. Once they've got her all ready for bed, they bid her goodnight, leaving her alone in this big, gorgeous room. No matter how pretty it is to look at, Mabel feels so uncomfortable around this house, especially with how hard the servants are working. She's already wondering how Patrick is doing on his own, so when she hears footsteps outside, she jumps out of bed. But surprise, surprise, it's the Duke instead, and he is dressed, or should I say undressed, for bed. Mabel is flustered, as all of us probably would be, but unlike the rest of us, she refuses him, telling him they're not a normal couple, so they shouldn't act like one. The Duke is not having any of it and gently holds her face. Sure, they're not a normal couple, but does she want people to find out about the contract? It's meant to be a secret, so in his mind, they should act like newlyweds. And then he flips her on the bed. Okay, no one freak out. He may be crazy hot, but there's no way in hell Mabel is gonna go through with this. And just as you might have predicted, she gets really mad and shoves him off. He was hoping they would sleep together so that the maids would find them in the same bed in the morning and think all was well. But let's be honest, after 5 years, I think this dude is getting desperate. Since that excuse fails, he moves on to telling her he loves her over and over again. Okay, this is starting to get a little creepy now. The lady said no, Percy. He moves in for a kiss, and for once, Mabel doesn't move away. But just before their lips touch, they hear the sound of footsteps outside the door. Glad for the excuse to put some distance between them, Mabel rushes over to find Meg and Patrick beside her. They ran into each other in the corridors. Apparently, Patrick had been asking all over the mansion for his mommy. Poor little guy. Meg notices her brother sitting on the bed and asks Mabel if he was bothering her. I feel like she knows exactly what just happened, but the lady pretends it's all fine. She takes Patrick back to his bedroom to sing him a lullaby, leaving Meg to bid her brother a very awkward goodbye. Anyone else kind of glad he got caught? He was coming out real strong just then. I feel like he needs to be taken down a few pegs. The next morning, Mabel wakes after a fitful night of sleep, not used to her new bed. She turns over to find the Duke sitting right beside the bed, staring right at her. Seriously, man, tone it down a little. As anyone would be, Mabel is totally freaked out. Her scream is loud enough to bring maids rushing into the room, only to find the Duke on one knee, telling them to get out. Other than creepily watching her sleep, he also came to ask her to breakfast so they could eat together. Though I'm pretty sure he could have done that without giving her a mini panic attack. Mabel tries to draw a boundary, suggesting that they eat separately from now on. The Duke responds that it would be a nightmare for the staff, and once again uses the excuse that they have to convince people that they're falling in love. But then he lands the real kicker. He points out that Patrick thinks they're really husband and wife now. Wouldn't it be weird for him to see mom and dad not eating together? Ugh, I hate that he's right. Just to really seal the deal, he also tells her about his pinky promise with Patrick and how he swore not to leave them alone again. After that, Mabel really has no choice. She agrees to act like a happy wife and then kicks him out so she can get changed. Patrick and Meg are waiting right outside the door, so he grabs his son and takes him to the dining room. Soon, the whole family are assembled in front of another fancy meal. Although, is anyone else wondering why they have steak for every meal? Like, for breakfast too? Really? They all ask about how Patrick slept. Seems like everyone has worried, but in the end, he was fine. Then in return, he asks how mom and dad slept because he thought they stayed together. After Mabel splutters out half her breakfast, the Duke reassures her that it's normal for husband and wife and doesn't deny his assumption. All of these little lies are building up to form the picture of a perfect couple, just the way the Duke wants it. And the reason he wants it that way is so that word gets back to the Queen about their marital bliss. But she's not going to sit still and let them fawn over each other. She orders her butler to visit the Quintrell mansion to deliver an invitation for a tea party. After all, there's a new duchess in town. It isn't long before the invite falls into Mabel's hands. When she finds out it came from the royal palace, she starts to sweat. But the letter itself is perfectly polite, inviting her to a party for all the noble ladies in 6 days' time. So at least she won't be alone in front of the Queen. She's about to send off her reply when suddenly the maid announces a visitor. A woman named Bonnie Mercy has arrived as Patrick's new tutor. Once again, it seems like the Duke made a decision about Patrick without consulting his mother. I don't know about you guys, but he's really starting to get on my nerves. The Duke insists that since Patrick is his heir, he needs to learn the basics of noble etiquette as soon as possible. Lessons will begin tomorrow, and for today, Bonnie is just going to introduce herself to the young master. The moment she leaves the room, Mabel flies off the handle. She doesn't disagree with the decision, but she at least should have been informed. The Duke apologizes and tries to claim it was all late notice, but Mabel doesn't believe a word of it. She's worried that Patrick is still too young. Besides that, he's still adjusting to a new home. Isn't it a little early? The Duke assures her he's only trying to do the best for his son, and eventually his wife softens. But in future, he is told firmly to inform her about all decisions in advance. She tries to leave, but the Duke takes her hand and suddenly gives her a little kiss on the forehead. Such a classic boyfriend move. They make you mad and then act all cute to get forgiveness. A few days later, Patrick is acting all moody at the dinner table, so Percy asks what's wrong. He seems to be having some trouble adapting to his new lifestyle of academia. I guess it's a pretty big swing from just playing games all day. The Duke has heard that so far, he's been learning pretty fast, but he offers to slow down the pace of the classes if it's too much for the kid. Suddenly, he changes his mind, claiming that he wants to work as hard as possible to make his parents proud. I'm not gonna lie, if I was Patrick, I would absolutely have taken him up on that. But he does ask for one small favor. He wants one day to play with his mother all day with no classes. He's quite dedicated to his studies, so it takes a while for him to figure out a day in his busy schedule that he could afford to take off. He asks for one in 6 days' time, but that's when the Queen's tea party is. As soon as she admits that she's going to the palace, the Duke seems concerned. As he probably should be. It wouldn't be Wilhelmina if she didn't have something up her sleeve. Later in the day, he seeks Mabel out to ask her about the tea party. Because of course he does. He tries to convince her not to go, because he says he has a bad feeling, which duh. But she can't decline an invitation from the literal queen. That would be the quickest way to get on her bad side, which they really don't want to do. She also worried about the reputation of both their houses, which immediately cheers up the Duke. After all, she's not the type to worry for people she doesn't care about. In the end, the Duke lets her do what she wants, only asking that she be careful. The long-awaited tea party finally rolls around. The other noble ladies are actually really sweet, asking all these questions about the secret wedding and how pretty she looks. When the Queen arrives, they all stand to greet her and go into subservient mode. Wilhelmina is on her best behavior and makes a big deal about welcoming Mabel into the fold. She does make a point about the invitation and says she didn't expect Mabel to show, which just means the poor girl has to reassure her yet again that she's honored to be invited. Does she want her to get on her hands and knees? The conversation soon turns into the position of royal maid, a prestigious role as the Queen's closest confidant. The previous maid has fallen ill, so a new spot has opened up, and it looks like all the noble ladies want it. All except Mabel, of course, which is a dead giveaway. Even though she's sitting quietly drinking her tea, the Queen picks on her to be her new maidservant. Mabel does her best to politely suggest that the other ladies might be better suited to the task, but that's when the Queen really becomes cold. She asks if Lady Quintrell doesn't appreciate the honor, and even asks if it's because they went after the same man. Yikes! After all that, Mabel has no choice. She gets up and curtsies, accepting the position with grace. Oh no, this is a total nightmare. Not only is she being taken away from her son, but now she has to serve the one woman in the world who hates her guts? Only the Queen could have thought of something like this. After that disaster of a tea party, Mabel finds the Duke waiting on the stairs for her. He noticed right away that something was up, even though she pretended to be fine in front of Patrick. Reluctantly, Mabel tells him what happened between her and the Queen, and how she's basically being forced to become the next royal maid. She apologizes for not consulting him first, but honestly, she didn't have a choice. Percy knows the Queen well enough to understand. Although he's frustrated, he congratulates her for handling the situation so well. Mabel is surprised to hear him speak so rudely about Her Majesty. If he said those things in public, he would be executed immediately. Of course, we already know Percy straight up doesn't care, and besides, he only ever wants to be honest to his wife. Actually, when Mabel originally ran away, she thought that he would end up with the Queen. Even if she's not exactly charming, she's still the monarch. He's been passing up on the chance to be the king this whole time, just because he's in love with Mabel. He returns the question to her instead. If he had suddenly vanished, would she give up on her fiancé and become a royal concubine? Obviously not. And Percy is dead set on Mabel. I think he's proven that much already. She starts to stress about the new position, but for some reason, Percy is totally chill. In his mind, this is just an excuse to see her more often. He doesn't care about irritating the Queen. Actually, it's basically his hobby at this point. They part ways, leaving Mabel to turn over her thoughts about the Duke. It's finally starting to sink in that his feelings for her are sincere. Why else would he risk the Queen's wrath and continually express his affection for her? But if that's the case, then the carriage attack is still a total mystery. Late that night, Mabel hears someone knocking at her bedroom door. Patrick runs in, all teary-eyed, and hugs her extra tight. Like any mother would, she immediately worries that something terrible has happened, and her fears only worsen when he says he was chased by a monster. As you might have guessed, this was all just a dream, but the fear is very real, so Mabel gathers him up in her arms and comforts him. That's what mothers are for, after all. She promises to defeat any monsters who come after him and tells him not to cry. Reluctantly, Patrick wipes his tears and asks if he can sleep with both his mother and father tonight. He thinks they sleep together every night, so of course it shouldn't be a problem. Of course, the Duke isn't there. Mabel is fumbling her way through an excuse when Patrick's nursemaid arrives, apologizing to her mistress for the sudden interruption. When he catches sight of her, Patrick yells that his nursemaid is a liar. Apparently, she was the one who told him that his mom and dad always sleep together. Oh, this is so awkward. Mabel tells him that the Duke has been working very late, and so he slept in his own bed to make sure his wife wasn't disturbed when he went to bed. Just for tonight, a one-time thing. This is good enough to convince Patrick, but now he wants to see if his dad has finished working yet. He's really not going to let this go, is he? The answer is no. Before Mabel can say anything, he's already sprinting to his father's office. Percy opens the door to find a grinning Patrick and an uncomfortable-looking Mabel. He's delighted to hear that his son missed him. To his credit, the Duke plays the part of big, strong father perfectly. And of course, he's also very excited to hear Patrick's plan to have them all share one bed. Just look at that smirk! Once they're all in bed, Patrick is too excited to sleep. He has lots of questions about their sleeping arrangements and why they can't go to bed together every night. Apparently, his nanny has been doing the Lord's work and telling Patrick that he can't join his parents in bed, clearly trying to cover up their patchy relationship. But no one explained why that was the case, so Percy offers him an answer. Mabel is begging with her eyes not to say anything weird, which only seems to encourage him. He then tells Patrick that they have to sleep together so they can make a baby, because of course he does. He says that if they sleep with anyone else, they might let go of each other's hands, so they have to sleep alone without Patrick to give him a little brother or sister. According to the Duke, making a baby requires holding hands very, very tightly. I can't tell if that's kind of cute or kind of gross. Does Patrick really need to know all of this? Mabel is literally shaking from across the bed. He's smiling like a comic book villain, clearly enjoying this very awkward situation. So instead of looking at his smug smile, she turns away. Then Patrick asks if there's a baby inside his mother's tummy right now, since they've been sleeping together the past couple of nights. The Duke of Adult Education explains that babies aren't made just from 1 or 2 nights together, and apparently, it's not helping that his mother sometimes refuses to hold hands. Oh gosh. Patrick immediately demands that his mother hold hands with the Duke. She tries to make an excuse, but her son is desperate for a brother or sister. That catches her attention. He admits that his parents are always busy and it gets boring on his own. It's certainly true that if he got a sibling, he would also get a friend. But that's a big ask of his mother, who isn't even sure she likes the Duke, let alone if she wants another child with him. This is all going exactly according to Percy's plan. He holds out his hand, and of course, with Patrick watching them, she has no choice but to take it. He interlocks their fingers and even starts to trace patterns on her palms, which really tickles. Patrick is asleep at this point, so she doesn't want to laugh and starts biting her lip. Percy leans over and gently touches her chin, telling her to stop or else she'll hurt herself. Okay, look, I know the Duke is cheeky and there's a lot we still don't know, but don't they look like the picture-perfect family? Mabel jerks away from his touch, almost waking Patrick. The Duke asks her to stay holding his hand all night, in case Patrick wakes up in the morning and finds them separated. Sure, Percy, this is all for Patrick's sake. She continues to hold his hand all night, but doesn't let her guard down. She still has reason to be suspicious of the Duke after everything that happened 5 years ago. In a flashback, we see Mabel returning to the Quintrell mansion after the carriage incident, where Margaret brought her to the drawing room and offered her some hot tea. Mabel couldn't explain her ragged appearance or frayed nerves. She didn't trust the assassin's warning, so she came to the mansion to get some answers out of Percy, but he wasn't there. And Margaret hinted at some kind of problem she heard about, which only made Mabel more nervous. She started to wonder if she had done something to upset him without realizing it. Fearing that the assassin might have been right, she decided to return to her own home. On the way out, she overheard two maids discussing her arrival, and one of them mentioned the engagement being broken off. It turns out Percy's father suggested he marry the queen, who was a princess at the time, instead of Mabel, since it would be better for the family. Wow, how shallow can you get? But after that, the pieces started to fall into place. What if Percy chose to go after the queen instead, and had an assassin take care of Mabel so that he was free to marry her majesty? I mean, it would make sense. You can see why she ended up running away. After hearing that, Mabel was convinced Percy didn't love her and would do anything to free himself of their engagement. So she vanished, and the rest is history. The memory came to her in a nightmare, one she's had a few times before. But now Mabel wakes up in bed beside her son and husband, whose hand she is still holding. She tries to subtly free her fingers, but the Duke's grip is like iron. Now that he's awake, she asks him to let go, complaining that her arm is numb. The Duke wants to wait for Patrick to wake up so that he can see they kept their promise. He should probably be getting up and going to work about now. Apparently, he'd rather stay in bed with her and Patrick. He moves his hand a little, and suddenly Mabel rolls away and asks him to stop being so flirty. It's making her really uncomfortable. She's biting her lip again, so the Duke climbs over to her side and brushes her chin, completely ignoring literally everything she just said. She flicks his hand away and gets up, leaving the room without another word. It's understandable that she feels weird around him, but her suspicion about the past is reaching its limit. It's time to find out the truth. The maids she overheard that day no longer work at the Quintrell mansion, so the only other option is to look through the Duke's records, hoping to find something that links him to the assassin. She spends the next few days searching all around the mansion and finds nothing. Just as she's about to give up, she notices a small, suspicious-looking book. It's a diary detailing the events from several years back when Mabel and Percy first met. Before she can look any closer, she's interrupted by a pair of maids. Lawrence is looking for her. It's time to start her duties as a lady of the house, and tomorrow she goes to the palace. There's no more time for snooping, and she can't take the book in case Percy notices. Reluctantly, she slides it back on the shelf, but leaves it facing the wrong way around. The next day, she arrives at the palace for her first day as the royal maid. She is welcomed by Duchess Vione, the new head lady-in-waiting. The Duchess is very friendly, but also very forward, and openly admits how surprised she is that the Queen would choose Mabel of all people for the position. Yeah, girl, we're just as shocked. She introduces her to the other ladies-in-waiting, who are all very busy preparing for the upcoming ball. Mabel will be responsible for catering and the supervision of the other maids. They're just running through the details when the Queen is announced. Everyone lines up to greet Wilhelmine, who came to greet Mabel on her first day. She takes her for a walk in the gardens, where Mabel struggles to act appropriately. Should she talk a lot or just a little? Either way, she seems to be doing something right, as Wilhelmine claims she already sounds like a lady-in-waiting. But she doesn't want to talk about the weather, she wants to talk about her marriage. Actually, she wants to threaten her. Again. So this is what she really picked her for, so that she could harass Mabel in the comfort of her own home. The Queen was quite surprised that after attempting to take custody of her child and making her feelings for the Duke very clear, Mabel ended up disobeying and marrying him anyway. It's getting really uncomfortable between them when the Duke suddenly appears. It's almost like he has a sixth sense for Wilhelmine's tricks. The Queen asks him if he's enjoying married life, and he responds very positively. He even goes one step further and wishes Her Majesty to find a husband as soon as possible so she can enjoy the same bliss. Ouch! He then steals Mabel away for a private conversation, leaving the Queen to stew in her anger. He takes her to his office, casually ordering a cup of tea while Mabel flies off the handle. He keeps provoking the Queen by flaunting their relationship in front of her, and in the end, it's Mabel who's going to pay the price for his arrogance. But Percy just can't stand it. Even now that they are married, she continues to flirt and openly admit her desire for the Duke. Even if she's the Queen, it's unacceptable, and he's sick of quietly accepting it. Why should he be the one to sit back and take it when she's acting so inappropriately? I mean, he makes a good point, and letting her get away with these sorts of things will only encourage her further. He takes her by the shoulders and tells her not to worry. No matter what happens, he won't allow anyone to hurt his wife nor his son. Mabel can't really argue with that, even if it does make her life more difficult. She tries to return to her position, but Percy innocently asks her to stay and have tea. He did ask for 2 cups after all. It's almost like he wants her to get in trouble. Mabel should really refuse, but something about his puppy face reminds her so much of Patrick that she can't refuse. So she gives in and sits down for tea and biscuits. The page boy reminds them of Patrick, and they get to talking about the future. The Duke teases his wife by acting sad about the end of their contracted year together. If the two of them no longer lived together, maybe Patrick would forget him or start to hate him. Mabel assures the Duke he's not that kind of kid, but ends up agreeing that they can still see one another, even if they're separated. Then Percy suggests they go on a family picnic together next weekend, clearly wishing to savor the time that they have. Diligently, she agrees and returns to the Queen afterwards, still smelling of peppermint tea. This infuriates the Queen because it turns out she was the one to gift him the tea some time ago. She told him that the leaves were expensive and that he should only share it with someone special. Does that mean he deliberately drank it with Mabel to make a point? I think we can all agree that's definitely something Percy would do. After a few hectic days at the palace, Mabel is able to return to the Robin Manor with her son. Her brother welcomes her eagerly and is just as delighted to see little Patrick, who is dressed up like some sort of French doll. Seriously, what is that outfit? The only person missing is Mabel, who is currently at a tea party. Mabel isn't surprised, and actually, she knows exactly whose party she went to, since it's the same one Margaret was attending. Her brother cuts the small talk off and ushers them in for dinner. Mabel and her sister-in-law discuss her first few days at the palace, where she was worked to the bone. Maybe it was exhaustion or just her nerves, but for whatever reason, she actually fainted on the sofa as soon as she got home after her first day. Mabel rushes in sometime after the meal is finished, apologizing for her late arrival. Once she has settled down, Patrick announces proudly that he's going on a picnic with his parents tomorrow. Her brother is relieved to hear that the three of them are getting on well. He then gives his wife a meaningful look, and she takes Patrick upstairs at once, giving the siblings a chance to chat. As soon as they're alone, he asks the big questions, like whether she still intends to divorce the Duke after their year is up. But that's a complicated question. For Patrick's sake, they should probably stay together. But if it were only up to Mabel, it would be a different story. Her brother assures her there's no need to rush. They have a whole year after all. The next morning, Patrick is dressed just as absurdly as before, this time with a silly little hat on his head. I kind of love it though. The weather is perfect for their picnic, and even their outfits are matching. He brings up the evening after Mabel's first day at work, when she woke up with a blanket after passing out on the sofa. She assumed that it was just a servant, but Patrick says it was his father and that he even told him to keep the noise down so as not to disturb her. Aww. When the Duke appears, her face darkens as she asks if it was him who laid the blanket on her. I don't know why she even has to ask. That kind of move has Percy written all over it. Patrick runs off to the carriage in a rush and accuses them of kissing when they arrive late. Oh wow. I can't tell if this kid is a romance killer or an enabler. Mabel hurriedly assures her son that no kissing was involved. They were literally just talking. The Duke reluctantly confirms her story, though he does seem to enjoy the way she blushes at the suggestion. They set off together and soon arrive at a gorgeous meadow filled with stunning purple flowers. Patrick picks one for his mother like a perfect little gentleman, but his mother tells him that flowers die when you do that, which is not the smartest thing to tell a little kid. Unsurprisingly, Patrick starts wailing and can only be comforted by his father. He assures the boy that the new flowers bloom from the stem, so it's not really dead, just sleeping. I mean, the bit that actually comforts him is the promise of pudding, but the story was sweet too. But first, lunch. They brought a whole array of food. Once the picnic blankets are down, it's time to dig in. Patrick acts as his father's wingman by trying to get Mabel to eat from his fork, but she refuses. She doesn't want to be treated like a child when her own son is eating perfectly fine by himself. As usual, the boys basically gaslight her into it, claiming that people should always accept food from someone they love. Really, these guys. Mabel can feel her son staring into her soul, so she accepts the food he's offering. Apparently, the Duke prefers to watch her eat rather than eating himself, which is kind of weird. Anyone else think this guy deserves a medal in making women uncomfortable? Seriously, he finds a new awkward gesture every day. Despite the Duke constantly trying to feed her, they are having a good time. Mabel is always happy if her son is smiling, and today he has a huge grin on his face. They polish the food off in no time, after which little Patrick falls asleep. He was so excited this morning that he woke up early and now he's finally run out of gas. While he naps on the blanket, the Duke pulls out a canvas and paints and asks her to pose for him. She sort of just stands there, so he adjusts her chin and tucks a lavender stalk behind her ear. It would be hard for anyone not to fall for him after a move like that, and with the Duke patiently watching her from behind the easel, Mabel once again questions whether his intentions are genuine or not. Mabel is perfectly calm until she realizes that he's not drawing the scenery, just her. For some reason, the attention embarrasses her and she freaks out. Trying to keep still, she composes herself and asks the Duke if he still has the portrait of her from years ago. Of course he does. In fact, he claims it's the only thing that's kept him going the last 5 years. As if that didn't make her guilty already, it was also around the same time that his father passed away when she was declared deceased. Yikes. Mabel starts to ask about his father, but Percy has just finished his sketch. He's pretty talented for a Duke. It's just a drawing for now, but he intends to polish it off when they get home. Mabel walks over to examine it when a sudden breeze picks up, blowing the scent of lavender and her hair into Percy's face. Can you imagine a more romantic scene? The Duke is totally captivated. He doesn't seem to hear when she asks about the finished product. They make eye contact, and suddenly things get very intense. Which means it's about time for Patrick to butt in and ruin the moment, as per usual. He's just woken up from his nap, but even he can tell that something has happened. His mother is blushing like crazy. While Percy chats with his son, Mabel finds an excuse to take a walk on her own, heading the long way toward the carriages. It's nice to be away from the constant romantic tension and pressure from her matchmaking son. All of a sudden, it starts to rain, even though the sky was totally clear just a moment ago. While rushing back to the carriages, she twists her ankle and trips, nearly falling to the ground. Luckily, Percy has a sixth sense for romantic opportunities and catches her just in time. He even brought an umbrella. Always the gentleman, our Duke. He's already put Patrick in the carriage, so he wraps her in his coat and guides her back home. Even though she was only in the rain for a short time, Mabel returns to the manor with a cold. She's already developing a fever. It's been quite some time since she was last ill. A couple of years ago, she and Patrick were on the road when she fell sick. He was crying, but she couldn't even comfort him in case she passed on her illness. She was in bed for 2 days straight. It must have been a very difficult time. Then, a knock at the door pulls her from her memories, announcing Patrick's arrival. She missed dinner and went straight to bed, so he came to see if she was okay. She's very visibly sick, but Mabel assures her son that she's perfectly fine. She's not very convincing though, mainly because she's burning up and her voice is all croaky. Before she can stop him, Patrick is running off to get the Duke. A few minutes later, he appears at her bedside like some kind of angel asking after her health. Again, she tries to tell him it's no big deal, that Patrick was exaggerating, but honestly, I think anyone can see that she's unwell. Percy decides to call a doctor, despite her continued protests. He knows she doesn't like the medical attention, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Besides, she has a job at the royal palace and a very worried son. Now is not the time to be risking her health. Reluctantly, Mabel agrees to see a professional, and her husband promises to ask him for the least bitter medicine possible. After a thorough checkup, it's determined that she's suffering from excess fatigue. She just needs a good rest, some good food, and she'll recover in no time. Mabel was hoping that would be the end of things, but the Duke is not any less attentive after the diagnosis. He sits by her bedside, determined to attend to her himself throughout the night. Talk about dedication. Patrick is with his nanny, and Percy insists that he has the time to spare. So Mabel has no choice but to let him sit beside her while she falls asleep. When she wakes up, she hears snippets of some kind of conversation and catches sight of Patrick's blurry figure. As the image sharpens, he is dragged away, yelling something unintelligible. She can't tell what's happening or where they are, but her son is crying and she can't move. Then she recognizes the man holding her child. He's the assassin from 5 years ago. He tells her that she should have lived quietly and raises his sword, telling her not to resist. Wow, that's dark. But is she really still suspicious that the Duke will send someone to finish her off? Really? The same Duke who's waiting there when she wakes up ready to comfort her? Yeah, girl, I don't think so. It's about 4 in the morning. He really has been there the entire night. Seeing her distress, he climbs onto the bed, clasping her hands in his. Maybe it's because she's just woken up, or maybe her true feelings are finally spilling out. Mabel starts interrogating him, asking why he's being so nice and why he didn't take the chance to become the royal consort. The Duke cuts her off abruptly and squeezes her tight. He says firmly that she is the only one in his mind. Poor guy. You would have thought he'd proved it by now. I don't get why she continues to doubt him. Percy is beginning to become frustrated as well. How many times can he answer the same questions? He knows there's something at the root of all this and doesn't want to pressure her into saying what it is, but he wants to find a way to reassure her once and for all. Dazed and still half feverish, she mumbles something about his journal. The Duke sits up straight and realizes at once it was her who had tampered with it. Of course, he noticed that it had been placed the wrong way around, which was strange since he had told the servants never to touch it. Mabel panics, thinking he's going to kill her for messing with his things, but the Duke gently brushes her cheek and offers to read it to her himself. If it can help this girl with her crazy paranoia, then it's well worth it. Still, she wonders if he plans to give her a fake or if he isn't worried because there's nothing concerning written in it. Exhausted by her own suspicions, Mabel suddenly turns away and tells the Duke she needs to sleep off her headache. Of course, he refuses to leave, and for once, she doesn't fight him. He's just going to do whatever he wants anyway. The next morning, she wakes up feeling much calmer, at least until she notices the Duke asleep on the bed beside her. He kind of looks handsome like that, with his hair all messy. Mabel reaches out to touch it and wakes him up, suddenly snatching her hand back in embarrassment. Mabel assures him that she's recovered, but still he firmly reminds her to take the rest of her medicines throughout the day. Patrick arrives and asks right away if she's feeling any better. He's such a good son. He's delighted to hear of her recovery and tells her never to get sick again. She's his favorite person after all. That makes the Duke, who is standing right next to them, only second place, but he doesn't seem to mind. He takes Patrick to go and have breakfast, leaving Mabel to rest some more. But she has no intention of sitting back in bed. The same uneasy feeling has stayed with her since the nightmare, and it looks like she's finally trying to put the pieces together. Mabel summons Lawrence the butler, hoping to uncover the past through those who lived through it with her, the staff. Those two servants that she overheard said that Percy was considering becoming the Queen's husband, but she's now heard from him several times that was never the case. She asks Lawrence for a record of the girls who worked in the mansion around the time of her disappearance. Just after she left, there were 6 young girls who quit their jobs. 2 of them must be the maids from her memories. Though there's another girl who signed up for regular leave immediately following her incident. That's suspicious timing, wouldn't you say? A maid arrives, reminding her to get ready. She forgot all about her job at the palace and ends up being late. Wilhelmine scolds her immediately and then starts asking about her recent cold, assuming the Duke nursed her back to health himself. She sure knows that man well. Mabel is about to pass out from stress when the Queen is called into a meeting. She doesn't want Mabel to come with, so she orders her to remain at the palace and prepare for the ball. My guess is that she doesn't want Mabel and the Duke to interact. Either that or she just wants to shame her for being late. She tries to keep her spirits up that day, continuing her work and reminding herself that it's a good thing she doesn't have to see the Duke today. As if summoned by that very thought, Percy suddenly appears beside her in the library. I'm becoming more and more convinced that this man is terrible at his job. Seriously, isn't he the most powerful man in the country? Doesn't he have stuff to do? Mabel is alarmed that he came all the way here to see her and says she's busy. The Duke claims he came for a very important reason, to check on her health. She was just checked by a professional a few hours ago, so Mabel reports that no, nothing has changed since this morning. They hear a commotion out in the corridor, and she recognizes a familiar and very unwelcome voice. Afraid they'll be seen, she shoves the Duke into a quiet corner and covers his mouth. Whoop! I think we've seen this scene before. The people who walk into the room are discussing some kind of serious political matter, and they don't appear to be leaving. Mabel is entirely focused on keeping hidden and doesn't notice the Duke wriggling closer about until he's touching her hand. Any excuse with this guy. Suddenly, they're close enough to hear each other's heartbeats, close enough for the Duke to move her fingers towards his lips and lower his face to hers. Shyly, Mabel turns her head and he lands on her cheek instead. Girl, come on! That was the most classic romantic setup in history. Would it kill her to say yes for once? Finally, the people move out of the library, allowing the couple to move apart at last. The Duke thinks she looks disappointed when they break away and asks if she really wanted a kiss on the lips. She makes all kinds of excuses, claiming she only let him land the kiss in the first place so that they wouldn't make any noise. Seeing that she's flustered, the Duke drops it. She tries to leave and he catches her hand, dropping a gift into her palm. It's medicinal candy, though Mabel jokes that it might be poison. Ugh, not again. To prove himself, he takes a piece and swallows it, flashing her a charming smile. After he's gone, Mabel takes a piece for herself and quietly admits that the candy is delicious. Back home after a long day of work, Mabel runs into Janet, asking after her son. He's still studying and playing like a normal kid, though he thinks of his mother very often. Then she asks Janet for help in finding the maids from the document. I'm not sure exactly what she asked. Janet must have accepted because that night, it's Mabel who puts Patrick to bed. He doesn't want to sleep and complains that it's too warm to use a blanket. His mother says he should always use a blanket, otherwise he might wake up with a cold and won't be able to play with her. Pay attention, kids. You see, parenting is all about guilt-tripping your children. Since she has recovered from her cold, he wants to go on a picnic again sometime soon, but only if they're all together. Mabel asks for the 100th time if he likes his father, which seems pretty obvious. Seeing her son's joy, she has no choice but to ask the Duke to accompany them again. Eventually, she leaves Patrick to fall asleep and heads to her own bed. She can't stop thinking, and when sleep doesn't come, she gets up, wandering through the corridors and ending up at the Duke's bedroom. She's already regretting her decision and tries to turn around, but then he opens the door, half asleep in his robes and looking especially handsome, I might add. She mumbles that she couldn't sleep, fumbling for a reason and admitting that she ended up at his door, which makes him smile. He invites her inside and offers her a cup of tea while Mabel starts to freak out. She uses the excuse of Patrick's request for a picnic to make things seem less awkward, but the Duke agrees immediately, so there's that excuse gone. He teases her over the fact that Patrick is obsessed with his father, accusing her of wanting to end their contract early so that he doesn't get more attached. Mabel then spots a portrait of her on his desk, the same one they spoke about the other day. He then shows her the painting from the picnic. He's almost finished coloring it, but already it looks beautiful. Even so, he says nothing compares to the real thing. But his dedication to the drawing was all because of that portrait that he stared at for 5 years. Staring at an imperfect version all that time made him desperate to get back the perfect one. And finally, he has the woman herself in his arms. Oh, say what you want about this man, but he knows how to deliver a line. Each day he spent waiting for her return was hell. Sometimes his thoughts turned very dark, and the only reason he could cling on to life was in the hope that she might be alive somewhere. To Percy, a world without Mabel has no meaning at all. He kisses her hand, and Mabel suddenly flinches, shifting backwards and pulling him with her. Somehow, that actually brings them closer together, and before she knows what's happening, they're sharing a kiss. Oh my gosh! Even Mabel can't resist the charming ways of her husband. She starts blushing and her eyelids flutter. When they break apart, she has lost all balance completely. That's the sign of a good kiss, all right. The Duke catches her, but as always, she loses it, shoving him forcefully away. She can't get any words out, so instead she just walks away, slamming the door behind her and returning to her own room. But the person she's the most angry at is herself. How could she have let that man get so close? Why didn't she stop him? And most importantly, however will she face him tomorrow? That's where the seed is planted. For the next few days, Mabel avoids her husband completely, and soon the royal ball arrives. Her outfit is absolutely stunning. It has to be, since this is the first royal event she has attended since officially becoming a duchess. Margaret agrees that it is beautiful, and one of the servants reveals that it was actually chosen by the Duke. Was he giving her space on purpose? He normally comes to see her on occasions like this. Patrick rushes in, calling both the ladies beautiful and asking his mother to return home as soon as possible. And he even forces a pinky promise, so you know it's serious. He waves them goodbye as the ladies prepare to leave. When they arrive at the ball, Mabel is greeted by her fellow royal maids, so Margaret disappears off to make conversation with her own friends. They shower her with compliments about her dress, and she asks if anyone has seen the Queen yet. She's been busy greeting the guests, who have apparently been complimenting the food, which Mabel organized herself. The Queen then walks over in a splendid outfit, with Duchess Vione by her side. Mabel only has kind things to say about her, but the Queen is just glaring at her. She grits her teeth and tries a half-hearted smile, asking if she came alone or with the Duke. Happily, she confirms that she came alone, since the Duke was busy. But of course, he appears moments later with an arm around her waist. It's like he always knows when is the worst time to show up. He's really going to get her in trouble. He notices the Queen a moment too late and formally greets her, asking if his wife has been performing well at the palace. Wilhelmine looks like she wants to slap them both, but she remains polite until Vione calls her away to start the dancing. Because she loves the drama, the Queen announces that she wants to take the first dance with Duke Quintrell. After a moment of shock, the Duke smoothly declines her request, claiming he doesn't want to leave his wife waiting. Uh-oh, there's that vicious smile again. The one that means the Queen is plotting something. Percy drags Mabel away to a quiet corner where his wife unleashes her anger. Percy might not care about offending her, but it's her who will pay the price at work tomorrow. But he doesn't seem to care much. He suggests that she leave the royal maid position if it's really that bad, and then he asks her to dance. After all, that was the reason he turned down the Queen. They might as well make a show out of it. As soon as they take the floor, rumors begin to spread around the ballroom about the disappearance and Mabel's elusive personality. The Duke tells her to ignore them and focus solely on him. And once the music starts, they fall into the steps easily. Actually, it's the same song they danced to when they first met. After becoming the envy of every couple at the ball, Mabel heads out for some fresh air. Percy comes to find her, worried that he upset her during the dance. He offers to take her home, but Mabel says she's fine. Instead, she asks him a not-so-subtle hypothetical question. What would the Duke do if something he believed with absolute certainty turned out to be wrong? She's being incredibly vague, so the Duke doesn't have much of an answer and starts pressing her instead to admit the real problem. The only advice he can offer is to have more faith in herself. The only things she should believe in are what she sees and what she finds out through investigating. Everything else is too variable to trust. The conversation then moves on to how she's been avoiding him ever since the kiss, which immediately makes Mabel go bright red and start babbling. I mean, what did he expect? But he takes it even further, claiming that it wasn't just an accident. He spends every second they're together wanting to hold her and kiss her like they did that day. Finally, Mabel's wall is starting to come down. She can see the honesty in his eyes, and when he pulls her close again, she does not resist. Fireworks shoot into the sky just as their lips meet. Caught up in the romance of the moment, Mabel has to admit that she's fallen back in love with him. This man who might have tried to kill her. It's love that is removing her barriers, making her start to trust that everything will be okay. Which is great. That's how we've been wanting her to feel for like 50 chapters. But of course, when the protagonist gets comfortable, that's when the villain rolls up her sleeves. Just at that moment, the Queen walks onto the balcony and spots them kissing under the fireworks. And something tells me she is not going to let that slide. Mabel is still thinking about the kiss on the carriage ride home, and really, who can blame her? I think I'd remember a kiss like that for a lifetime. Margaret can tell something has happened, but she doesn't press her sister-in-law for answers. The Duke isn't riding home with them because he's an important man and has many people still to meet at the ball. Her sister makes a comment about how much more comfortable Mabel seems these days with a life at the mansion, but with Percy especially. She was worried it would be hard to adapt, but let's be honest, it has. But at least from the outside, she seems to be getting along with her husband just fine. Margaret is also grateful because previously, the upkeep of the mansion was her responsibility. Now that Mabel is the Duchess, she's taken on some of the work and made Margaret's job a whole lot easier. She asks if she will remain at the Quintrell estate after the contract ends, but Mabel still isn't sure. Of course, it's a big decision, and honestly, it's pretty clear she's not going to be able to decide until we find out who was responsible for the assassination attempt. They arrive at home, greet Patrick, who is eagerly waiting up for them, and then at last, Mabel collapses into bed. But she can't rest just yet. There's a knock at the door. Janet walks in with a concerned expression on her face. But this isn't about Patrick. It's about the investigation of the maids. Janet asks a trustworthy source to try and find the 5 young ladies who quit the mansion after the accident. But it turns out, they're all dead. It appears they were murdered, and quite recently, too. Which means someone knew she was looking for them and decided to clear their trail. Janet swears she told no one, which is even more worrying. Who could have possibly known she was searching? And who would have been cruel enough and rich enough to send assassins after the maids? Not a servant, that's for sure. Whoever is behind this is of high status and must have spies in the mansion. Someone who was here before she arrived, who might be just around the corner even now. Unsurprisingly, Mabel's paranoia returns in full force that night. She barely sleeps at all and is too tired the next morning to work properly. Knowing that she's still in the grip of whoever tried to kill her is terrifying, and her thoughts just keep spiraling out of control. While she's panicking in the gardens, one of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting arrives to announce that she's been summoned by Her Majesty. Here it comes. It looks like it's time to suffer the consequences of last night's insult. Mabel acts extra polite when she enters, and although Wilhelmina is clearly in a bad mood, at least she's being civil. Envoys from the land of Teslan will be arriving the next week, and the Queen has prepared a parrot as a gift for their queen. Kind of weird, but okay. She wants Mabel to take care of it, since the King and Queen of Teslan are known to be fond of animals. It can't be entrusted to any old servant. All she has to do is feed the parrot until the envoy arrives, and most importantly, never, ever open the cage. Ugh, I have a bad feeling about this. Mabel thinks she must have got lucky and that the Queen isn't mad at her after all. She finds the parrot in a beautiful gilded cage in the gardens and is delighted to find that it can speak. While the bird is repeating, "I love you," over and over, Percy appears as if on cue. She's not quite ready to see him yet, so it's a bit awkward. She explains the task that the Queen gave her, which surprises the Duke as much as it surprised her. He had to sit through an entire meeting where the queen refused to stop glaring at him, so now both of them think they've gotten away with their behavior at the ball. Little do they realize that the queen doesn't give in that easy. Just 1 week later, the parrot is missing and the cage door unlocked. Mabel is certain she locked it properly and the key has been with her the whole day, so how the heck did it escape? It couldn't be worse timing either. The ambassadors from Tesson are leaving in just under 3 hours. She has to find the bird before then, but it might already have left the palace. Mabel thinks it may be better to come clean and prepare a new gift with what time they have left. So she enters the queen's office. Oh, this is such a bad idea. She admits the truth, and immediately the queen is furious. She doesn't want to hear any excuses. In her eyes, this is entirely Mabel's fault. Probably because she planned it that way. The queen asks how Mabel intends to make up for her mistake, but she doesn't have anything to say. Wilhelmine loses her temper, kicking over a chair and screaming at her. They can't send the envoys home empty-handed. That's like insulting the king and his whole country. Mabel falls to her knees, apologizing and agreeing to accept any punishment she deems necessary. Oh, girl, don't say that! This woman would literally kill you if she had the chance. Delighted, Wilhelmine tells her to kneel in front of the palace and beg forgiveness until such time as the queen decides to forgive her. Which could honestly be never, knowing her. A few hours later, Mabel is doing exactly as she said, humiliating herself in front of the palace visitors while the queen watches from a balcony above. The head maid tries to reason with her, as it's a very cold day and the parrot was only a backup gift anyway. Wait, is that true? Then she straight up lied earlier. Obviously, Wilhelmine is not in a forgiving mood and refuses to end the punishment. Meanwhile, Mabel is starting to lose all feeling in her knees and soon faints. She's about to hit her head on the concrete when the Duke, summoned by his husband's senses, appears and catches her just in time. Hardly conscious, she recognizes the blurry outline of his figure and tells him to go away. If the queen sees them together again, things will only get worse for her. Seriously, he should have listened the first time. This is all because of him. The queen orders Percy to get out of the way and let his wife finish her punishment. But he takes responsibility instead, claiming that it was his fault the parrot got lost and asking to be fined instead. Her Majesty is furious, but she can't prove he's lying, so she storms off, allowing the Duke to carry his ailing wife to a carriage and send her home at once. Does anyone else think things will only get worse after this? I think the queen might finally have reached a breaking point. For the next few days, Mabel is bedbound. The Duke tends to her himself, just like he did when she fell ill. He's been on strike and hasn't returned to the palace since the incident a few days ago, out of protest. Besides, he can't do much work when he's busy worrying about his wife. Mabel is grateful that he stepped in and caught her, but asks why he dared to lie to the queen about the parrot. If he had any favor left with Wilhelmine, it will almost certainly have disappeared now. People are probably gossiping about it already. The Duke saw no other option. His wife had fainted. The only thing that mattered was ending the punishment and taking care of her. So he did the only thing he could think of. He's only sorry he didn't get there earlier. He asks about the job and whether she intends to resign from her post as the royal maid. They both suspect that this was all her plan from the beginning. At this point, it seems dangerous to continue working in the palace. Even Mabel, who always sees the best in people, thinks he might be right. He offers to tell the queen on her behalf, but she refuses. Whether it was planned or not, she still did lose the parrot, so she should take responsibility and face the facts herself. The Duke leaves her to rest up, planting a little kiss on her forehead before he goes. He tousles her hair and bids her goodnight, stirring up a strange feeling in her chest. It seems to have finally sunken in that Percy has no ill intentions. He's just a man who has always loved her with his whole heart and who will continue to protect her from the real villains of this world. The next morning, she wakes up with a note crumpled in her hand. It's from Percy, claiming he left her a gift to make up for his absence. It's the portrait, which is now complete. Delighted, Mabel asks a servant to frame it and hang it on a wall, which is sweet. Then Patrick appears, happy to see her out of bed for once. Since she has finally recovered some of her energy, Mabel decides to get it over with and visit the queen. Nervously, Mabel approaches the throne and curtsies, offering all the usual formalities. Somehow, it's 10 times more scary when Wilhelmine smiles back and asks if she's feeling better. Yeah, no thanks to you. Mabel, for once, isn't eager to please her. She responds in short, sharp sentences, and when the queen tries to assign her daily tasks, she cuts her off. She announces her resignation, watching the queen's face darken as she asks for a reason. After the last incident, the Duchess claims she's not qualified to serve as the royal maid, which is a very nice way of saying your standards are impossible and you're a horrible person. The queen smiles gently, admitting that she took things too far the other day. She doesn't quite apologize, but she agrees to smooth out any further incidents as they pop up. But that isn't what Mabel is asking for. She wants out, permanently, and without any conditions. There are so many women who would be better for the job, so Mabel claims it's in the interest of both Her Majesty and her royal staff that someone more appropriate take the job instead. The queen is sad to see her go, or at least that's what she says. But she lets her walk away, and as she's about to reach the door, she gives her one last jab about how the Duke always arrives just in time to clean up her messes. Oh, girl, are you going to let her get away with that? Mabel, she goes the other way completely and agrees. The Duke is always so kind and attentive towards her, she says, and if anything, this latest incident only made their love stronger. She thanks Wilhelmine, who looks just like she got slapped, and excuses herself, walking out of the throne room to the beautiful sound of the Queen's stunned silence. Well, until the doors are closed. Then a ferocious roar sounds from behind her, accompanied by some loud banging and a lot of screaming. The Duke is very pleased to hear about her parting words later that day, delighted that she took some revenge for once, even if it was only a little. Now that the adrenaline has worn off, she's a little worried she was too reckless. But the Duke assures her nothing will happen and teases Mabel for relying on another woman's affection for her husband to keep him out of trouble. He's acting all flirty, and soon the topic of the kiss comes up again, making her blush. The Duke asks her to confess her love just once out loud. Shocked, Mabel stands up at once and refuses. But even just the fact that she's so embarrassed is basically like a confession in itself. Smiling, the Duke gets to his feet and hugs her from behind, telling her that's enough for now. He then tells her he loves her and says he intends to tell her over and over again until she can hear it without blushing. In that case, it'll be a few years at the earliest. Winter is now on the way, which means the Quintrell household needs to pay attention to their budget as they head into the colder months. Margaret usually has Percy help her with the admin, but this year Mabel is on hand to help. Except she keeps daydreaming whenever she tries to teach her the basics. Her mind has been a little preoccupied, what with the blossoming love between her and the Duke, and the whole assassination plot that she still hasn't made any progress on. Patrick and Percy have been tag-teaming to make sure Mabel takes medicine every day, since she has been so weak and frail lately. Margaret encourages her to drink up, even though it's bitter, and then heads off to finish some private work. A surprise guest comes to visit her soon after that. After finding out about the incident at the palace, Maribel comes rushing over as soon as she could. She reports that everyone back at home is healthy and well, and then asks about a Marquess Kinray, who addressed a letter to their home intended for Mabel. Her face immediately changes when she hears that name, but she assures her sister it's nothing unusual and takes the letter. It turns out this mysterious Marquess intends to visit the Robin household next month, but since he would be Mabel's guest, she asks the Duke if he can stay at the Quintrell mansion instead. The Duke is intrigued, so she explains that he's a noble of a neighboring kingdom who helped her in the years she was away. He's coming to their country on a business trip after his wife passed away, which makes Percy very concerned indeed. A rich, single man who has history with his wife? Well, I guess it's better to keep your enemies close. The Duke puts on his best fake smile and tells her it's fine for him to visit. But as soon as she leaves, his mind begins to turn to all the possible outcomes of this stranger's arrival. Sometimes I think these two are a terrible match. Have you ever seen a couple that overthinks this much? A month passes in no time, and soon the Quintrell household is well prepared for their guest. Percy has even dressed up for the occasion. Mabel and Patrick are also in their finest attire. The three of them walk out as a family to greet the Marquess, and the Duke is immediately taken aback. It turns out this threatening guest that he was so worried about is actually an aged, friendly-looking man. Patrick even calls him Grandpa. He formally introduces himself to the Duke with the utmost respect, and they shake hands. But Percy can't quite relax yet. Now there's a different kind of problem, the problem of familiarity. Patrick, Mabel, and the Marquess have spent so much time together that they feel like they're family of their own and forget about the Duke almost instantly. Patrick especially seems like he might be swayed by the gifts brought by the Marquess. The boy follows the older man around all day, asking to sleep in his bed and even feeding him at dinner. Oh dear, this isn't good. After dinner, they share all sorts of memories from the past. Luckily, Margaret is there to smoothly transition the conversation and asks about how she arrived at his estate. It was unusually kind for the Marquess Kinray to accept a pregnant young lady without any proof of her identity, and even kinder for him to host her for so many years. When Patrick was born, the nobles of the nation recognized his peacock-colored eyes and knew at once whose child he was. Soon, Percy decides he has enough of hearing about the good old days and about how much he owes the Marquess and retires for bed. Mabel follows him out and forces him to admit what's been bothering him all day. The Duke is a little embarrassed to reveal that he's jealous of the Marquess, even though he's also very grateful for the support he gave his wife. Mabel thinks it's kind of funny, how unreasonable he's being, but the thing that bothers Percy most is that he thinks the old man knows the reason why she left in the first place. His wife assures him that's not the case. Only she knows the details of what happened that day. Percy is still desperate to know himself, but since she won't tell him, he steals a kiss instead. The next day at dinner, Mabel coughs very suddenly at the table, which somehow everyone interprets as a sign of her being pregnant. I'm not sure where the link is there, but she firmly denies any curiosity and even admits in front of the Marquess that she just recently had her period. Well, I don't think there will be any doubts now. The Duke is a little concerned that she might still be ill, so yet again when Mabel returns to her room, a tray of tea is brought out for her. But after taking the first sip, she drops the cup, spilling the medicine everywhere. The maid looks worried, but she only asks for a doctor and demands she tell no one. Wait, what's going on? Could she really be pregnant? Even though they haven't, you know. When the doctor arrives, she asks him to check the tea, worried that it's not the same medication he prescribed. In fact, she thinks it might be poison. But that means it would have to be someone inside the mansion who would benefit from her disappearance. As if by magic, Margaret knocks on her door, and suddenly the pieces fall into place. Was it Margaret this whole time? She does have access to the tea, and was one of the people encouraging her to take it every day. The only thing she's missing is a motive. Why would the Duke's sister benefit from her death? Mabel is terrified. Until the doctor has finished analyzing the medicine, she won't know whether her suspicions are justified or not. In the meantime, the Marquess's visit has come to an end, and he asks to talk with her in private before leaving. While Patrick is running around playing in the gardens, he mentions the Duke and how clearly jealous he has been over the last week. Yeah, Percy isn't exactly the king of subtlety. But the Marquess is pleased to see that he loves her enough to be jealous of an old man in the first place, and that only made him more curious about why she ran away in the first place. Mabel answers vaguely, claiming she gets easily scared, and once a doubt has sprouted, she finds it hard to ignore. It's fairly obvious that her concerns are still present, so the Marquess gives her some advice. He tells her that she's stronger than she thinks and should trust herself more. Believe in what you see and what you feel in your heart, because time will reveal the truth. What a poetic man! I bet he was a real romantic back in his day. After he has left, Mabel is running an errand in the mansion when she stumbles upon Percy's diary again. Remembering the Marquess's advice, she searches for the entry of the day they met, at the masquerade ball. He wrote nothing but compliments about her beauty and how entranced he was by her. Then he found out her name and fell even harder for her. From there, however, the entries get darker and darker. She can practically trace his descent into madness from the day she left and all the pain she caused him. Mabel starts to cry, and doesn't stop. We'll stop here for today, guys. Yes, I know you want more. Don't forget to ask for the next part in the comments section. Thank you guys for watching and for your support. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Till the next one.